I'm going to start off by giving a little introduction of myself and then what NPAN does, and then I'm going to launch into the content. So let's see. Oh, I tried to forward my slides and now it's not doing it. There we go. Actually, I'll start with myself and then I'll ask you guys a question. So I'm Rebecca Thistlethwaite. I've worked for almost 9 years now for the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network. We are a project of the Center for Resilient Agriculture and Food Systems. I think I got that right, CRAFS, which is the new name for the Center for Small Farms. And that is housed in Crop and Soil Science at Oregon State University. NPAN was started about 16 years ago as a project that helped unite meat processors and producers and extension agents around the country to help solve for problems happening in the small meat processing sector. And it was launched by Dr. Lauren Gwynn at Oregon State. And I took over about 9 years ago and have grown the network ever since. And we're a unique program in that we serve a national audience. So we're not just Oregon centric. We work with processors and producers all over the country. But I do live in Oregon, born and raised. And so I know a little extra about what's happening in Oregon. So I'll touch on some of that tonight. So first, I wanted to know who is in the room tonight. So how about, since I can't see your videos, how about you pop in the chat if you are already direct marketing meat? DTC stands for direct to consumer. So is there anyone in the audience who is already direct marketing meat? If you can go ahead and didn't set up a poll, but just pop something in the chat and let me know. Maybe yes, what kind of species? Let me see what you're saying. Yes, poultry. Yes. Meat birds. Yaks, cool. Beef. Planning to with goats and sheep. Beef, chicken, turkey, pigs. Beef and hogs. All right. Anyone else hasn't chimed in yet? So it sounds like considering. Okay. It sounds like there's some experience in the group tonight, so that's good. But I will also make sure that those of you who haven't quite delved into it yet or are in the planning stages, that I cover enough of the basics that you feel like you can get started. All right, I'm going to minimize my video here so I don't see myself. Okay, so a little bit more about NPAN. Our primary audience are small scale meat processing plants. That makes up about 45% of our network. Livestock producers is about a quarter. And then we've got retail shops and brands and marketers of meat, as well as industry. An extension, I don't see where their little pie slice is, but they're about 12%. But our primary audience is the processors, but we really work up and down the supply chain, getting people talking to each other and understanding where everyone's coming from. Our purpose is developing, supporting, and growing the niche meat supply chains. We specialize in business planning, sales, marketing, operations, logistics, and regulatory aspects of the niche meat supply chain. And we've curated a group of about 15 consultants from around the country that provide free technical assistance to producers and processors who call or email us. Our mission is to help small meat processors thrive by growing our shared wealth of information and innovation. So we're really a network where there's a lot of peer learning. We have a very active listserv and a Facebook group of about 4,500 members. So there's a lot of wisdom in that group, and you guys are all welcome to join that. I'll give our website at the end for how you can sign up. Everything we do is free, with exception of a couple of our courses. And we're really responsive to the needs of the industry. So every year in January, we survey everyone in our network about what they want to learn about, and then we spend the whole rest of the year creating that content for them. So I'll tell you a few of the things that we've produced. We have a very robust website that we're always updating with new information for meat producers and for processors. Like I said, we have a listserv, we have a newsletter that goes out monthly, and we have a private Facebook page that's called the Small Meat Processor Support Group. I feel like a lot of times it's a lot of support for the struggles that meat processors go through. We also put on courses and webinars. We have 2 short courses that you can take anytime. One is called the Meat Processor Academy, and one is called the Western Meat School. We also do a more intensive mastermind program for meat processors and for meat brands. And then we do consulting. NMPAN just stands for Meat and Poultry Processing Technical Assistance. That's a USDA-funded consulting project where we give up to a couple hours of free consulting. We also do more intensive coaching where we will send out an expert to your processing facility to give a walk around and give you advice on how to improve your facility. We just launched a workforce development program at Blue Mountain Community College that just started yesterday, actually, called the Master Butcher Program. And then we also do some feasibility studies and business plans for new processing facilities. All right. Before I launch into the learning outcomes, does anyone have any questions? I'm going to have lots of time at the end for questions. I'm going to try to save about a half an hour. We're going till 7, right? Yeah. So I'm going to try to save the last half hour for questions. But feel free to pop them in the chat as you think of them. I may hold them till the end, or I might try to address them while I'm talking, but I can't really see the chat very well. Okay. So today we're going to talk about the different forms of regulation. We're going to talk about custom exempt meat processing in particular. We're going to focus in on that one. We're also going to talk about retail exempt, which is another avenue that you might want to explore if you're interested in starting your own facility, but don't want to invest millions of dollars into a full USDA slaughterhouse. We're going to talk about how processors work, how they make money, how they measure success, and then finally, how you can partner with your processor so that you both benefit and get a great product out there. All right. So there are 4 types of inspection or exemption status. So there's federal or state inspection. Federal is regulated by USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service, known as FSIS. And now we have state inspection in Oregon that is done through the Oregon Department of Agriculture. These are essentially the equivalent set of rules and inspection status. The only difference I'll show you in the next slide, there's just some slight difference on where you can sell that meat. But it's the same set of rules in terms of sanitation, food safety, animal handling procedures, looking at the animal while it's alive, while it's being killed, and after it's been killed. The inspector has to be there on site when you're doing slaughter, and everything else is the same. Personal use exemption. That's an exemption in federal law that lets you slaughter and kill your own animals on your own property for your own consumption. So that is just pretty obvious what that means. You can kill your own animals. That seems like a no-brainer, but there are some countries in the world where that's not allowed. Custom exemption, I'm going to discuss in the next few slides. So those are typically your small mom and pop meat lockers that don't have inspectors on site. And then finally, the last one that a lot of people don't know about is called retail exemption. And that is basically what all grocery stores, restaurants, and small butcher counters fall under, is called retail exemption. So who needs to go the inspected route? Well, in general, if you have enough animals that you want to sell your meat by the cut, so instead of selling shares of an animal or portions of an animal, you think you have enough meat to sell year round by the cut. Maybe that's in farmers markets or through grocery stores, or wholesaling to restaurants, stuff like that. That probably meaning that you're going to have about more than 10 beef a year, or more than 20 hogs a year, or more than 40 sheep and goats. Anything under that, you probably can use the custom exempt route, which I'm going to talk about in a second. You also need to go the inspected route if you plan to develop wholesale distribution channels or sell to brokers and distributors. If you plan to do significant e-commerce sales, if you plan to develop ready-to-eat or other value-added products, and then if you want really high-quality processing, packaging, and labeling, essentially consumer product level presentation. That's stuff that you see in fancy packages at the grocery store. That all needs to be done under inspection. But if you're not raising that many animals, you probably can do custom exempt, which I'll talk about after this slide. So federal inspection, as I said, that's done by USDA FSIS. State inspection now is done by Oregon Department of Agriculture. Federal inspection, you have to meet the Food Safety Modernization Act. You have to comply with the Humane Slaughter Act. These products can be sold nationally or internationally. They can be sold by the cut to anyone. So this gives you the widest variety of marketing options if you go with federal inspection. Currently, there are, I think we just got one more USDA slaughterhouse in Oregon. Montgomery Meats just got their slaughter facility under inspection. So I think there's 14 available now in the state of Oregon. So not a ton, but they're out there. Secondly is state inspection. That's done by ODA. That means it must be at least equal to federal inspection compliance, and that meat can be sold by the cut to anyone within the state of Oregon. So currently, Oregon just started this program, and they're not part of the cooperative interstate shipment program yet. So that means that state inspected meat can only be sold within the state of Oregon. It can't cross state lines until we become part of the CIS program. So if you want to do e-commerce and sell that meat to other states, to people in other states, you're going to need to go with USDA. But if you're just selling it at farmers markets or to grocery stores or restaurants within the state, state inspection is fine. I will say, I think there's only 2 so far that have gone through ODA red meat state inspection, but there's a few more in the queue that are waiting to get their grant of inspection from the state. Okay, that's the inspected stuff. Okay, now custom exempt. I'm gonna move the little camera over there. Okay. So custom exempt operators, those are your small mom and pop style meat lockers, of which there's many, many more in Oregon. There's probably, I think the last time I looked a few years ago, because I did a mailing to all of them, there was like 83 licensed custom exempt operators in the US, in Oregon. There's custom exempt mobile slaughter trucks that just do the slaughter. And then there's custom exempt butcher shops. Some of them also slaughter on site. A lot of them just do the processing. The way that works is they can only process for the owner of the animal. So they're processing for the owner of that animal, the members of their household, non-paying guests, or household and farm employees. So that is why all of that meat is stamped not for sale. I'm sure many of you in the audience have seen that. It all has to be stamped not for sale. So that means the meat cannot be sold. Animals slaughtered and processed under custom exempt still have to be slaughtered under the Humane Slaughter Act. So they still have to comply with humane slaughter laws. They still have to comply with everything regarding sanitation, record keeping, etc. The only difference is there's not an inspector standing there watching them kill every animal. But the USDA could show up unannounced at any time, and if they see them not killing animals humanely or not following sanitation regulations, they could shut down their facility. And what does this mean for the producer? That you need to have a chain of custody record, and that if the animal's older than 30 months old, you need to have an affidavit of the animal age. That generally doesn't come into play unless you're killing old cows or old bulls. So they still have to follow all the regulations of the USDA. They just don't have an inspector standing there. That's why it's called exempt. It's not exempt from federal law. It's just exempt from inspection. So the way this works is you can pre-sell a portion of that live animal, as you can sell it as a whole, a half, a quarter, an eighth. But you're selling a portion of the live animal and you're not selling meat. That's why the meat is stamped not for sale. So you need to pre-sell the animal before it goes to the processor. That is why you do not charge by the pound of finished meat, but by the live animal weight or the hanging weight. Live animal weight is technically the legal way to go. Hanging weight is how it's generally done. Do not include the kill fee and the cut and wrap fees in your pricing. Your customer is supposed to pay that separately. They pay the processor directly for those costs. So if you split it between two people, they pay half the kill fee, half the cut and wrap fee, right? If you split it with 4 people, they each pay a quarter of that. Does that make sense before I move on? I know there's always a lot of questions about custom exempt. Oops. I don't see any in the chat. Okay. So there are some gray areas in custom exempt, and there's some ways to make it work for you as a direct marketer. USDA does not have any specific rules about how many shares you may sell in any one animal. Some states do have laws on the books that restrict animals to being split up a maximum of 4 or 8 ways, but Oregon does not have any such restrictions. However, the carcass must be labeled with each owner's name, and owner records must be kept. Most of your processors are not going to want to deal with anything smaller than an 1/8 share. And most of them would rather that you do quarters as your smallest share. But this is something my colleague came up with here, sort of a way to push against the upper limits of custom exempt. So say you're a producer in Oregon, you hold an open house twice a year where your core customers come, maybe you have a barbecue. You know that the younger customers or the smaller families maybe don't have a chest freezer, don't eat as much meat. And at that open house, you get 4 or 8 people sitting at a table to go in on an animal. And, say your average beef hangs at 700 pounds and you'll get about 400, probably about 350 pounds of cut and wrap meat off of that. So a quarter share would be 100 pounds, 1/8 would be 50, and a 1/16 would be 25 to 30 pounds. And if they're all sitting around the table, maybe you get them to all agree to one cut sheet for that animal. Some people call this cow pooling. That makes your processor much happier if there's one cut sheet for an animal rather than 4 different cut sheets for 4 different quarters. The easier you can make it on your processor, the happier they will be, and the more likely they will be to fit you in their schedule. if you get very selective about breaking up into tiny little shares and dealing with 16 different customers on one animal, they're probably not going to be your favorite customer to deal with. The other thing here is your customer who pre-purchased the animal should be the one providing the cutting instructions to the processor, not you. So when I used to farm, I raised pigs. We mostly sold halves. We didn't really go to quarters on our pigs because do you get the front quarter or the hind quarter? There's so much good stuff there, right? So we just did halves. We would provide sample cutting instructions to our customers to make it really easy for them if they didn't know how to cut up a pig. And then they took that sample cutting instruction to the processor and told them how they wanted it cut up. So that kept it pretty simple for them. Let's see. How would that apply to poultry? Oh, I'll make sure I touch on poultry. If we in-house process, do we need to charge the fees? Would one need to build a dedicated facility to qualify for custom exempt? Okay, so for poultry, I'm going to go back a little bit. For poultry, your options are federal inspection. There is no state poultry inspection. So your options are federal or what is called the poultry exemption, which is an exemption to the federal law for poultry. And in Oregon, they allow you to, I'm going to try to remember this. Melissa probably knows better than I. You can raise and kill up to 1,000 birds on your property as long as you sell direct to the end user with very minimal infrastructure. You could probably do it in a pop-up tent outside and some stainless steel equipment without a huge investment. If you want to raise and harvest up to 19,999 birds, because the upper limit is 20,000. Between 1,000 to 20,000, you need to get a license from ODA, and they will come out and review your facility plans and look at your facility. And then after that, I think they come out once every year. That's not inspection, that's licensing. And they just come once a year to make sure that your facility is sanitary, doesn't have rodent issues, stuff like that. Melissa, did you want to add anything to that?
Only that we do have some resource information available if you're interested in that custom, the 1,000 bird exemption, and then some additional information if you're interested in state licensing. And I can find that and put that in the chat for you.
Awesome. Yeah, and I helped write a best practices guide for on-farm poultry processing that Melissa can pop a link to in the chat. Okay, if we in-house process. Well, if you in-house process, you have to be a licensed facility. So you will have to get licensed with ODA as a custom exempt meat processor. They will come and visit your facility and look at your facility plans and make sure you have potable water and appropriate sewage system, all of that. So once you get licensed, you can follow do everything that custom exempt processors do. You can't do unlicensed processing for anyone except for yourself. Would one need to build a dedicated facility to qualify for custom exempt slaughtering, butchering? Are the sanitation standards pretty stringent? Well, I have seen custom exempt processing, so not non-slaughter facilities, places that are just cutting up meat. I have seen them done in pretty small facilities, commercial kitchens that or old restaurants that have been turned into butcher shops. It doesn't need to be large. A couple 1,000 square feet or 1,000 square feet is plenty, especially if you're just processing smaller animals. If you're not processing beef, then you don't need a giant walk-in cooler. The sanitation standards are the same for any facility that's processing meat. They're all federal standards. So I don't know what the CFR are, the Code of Federal Regulations, but it's essentially washable walls, washable floors, potable water, appropriate sewage system. What else? Stainless steel equipment that you can appropriately sanitize, lighting, stuff like that, hand washing stations. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Melissa. Okay, I'm going to keep going forward until we get to the next stanch of questions. So hopefully that made sense about custom exempt, that you need to pre-sell the animal before you get it slaughtered. If you have it slaughtered, you either need to have a licensed mobile slaughter truck come to your farm to do it, or you need to take your animal to a licensed custom exempt facility where they will kill it for the new owners of that animal, and they will cut it for the new owners of that animal, which is no longer you. So you give your customers who bought that animal the phone number and the address of the processor, and they deal with it after that. You are not to bring that meat home and sell it out of your freezer, as many people do on Facebook. I see people all the time selling not for sale ground beef on Facebook. It's not legal, and you could be caught. USDA does have a whole team of investigation staff all over the country looking for situations just like that. I'm not a regulator myself, but I want you to run a business that you can grow and that can make money. And generally, you can't do that if you're operating illegally. So that's just my take on regulations and following the law. Okay, so the last form of not inspection, but the last exemption that I wanted to tell you about is called retail exempt. So retail exempt started in the early 70s, and it's basically what allowed grocery store meat departments to not have a USDA inspector standing there. Same with restaurants. So what this allows you to do is to take inspected meat that is either a carcass or boxed meat, and it allows you to cut it up, slice it, trim it, half it, quarter it, wholesale it, cut into retail cuts such as steaks, chops, roasts, freezing. It allows you to grind and freeze that product. It also allows you to cure, cook, smoke, render, refine livestock fat in this facility and sell it to the consumer. So that's how grocery store meat departments don't have to have an inspector standing there. You know how they have that whole fresh meat case. They're in the back cutting it up and making sausage and putting it out. And all of that is done without a USDA inspector. It's also how restaurants take whole carcasses and cut it up and cook it and serve it to customers, or make sausage on site. Some restaurants do their own curing and smoking programs. This is the federal law that allows them to do that without USDA inspection. But the key is that the meat that they started with was all inspected. So it all came from either USDA or a state inspected processor, and either the carcass has a stamp on it or the box of meat has a stamp on it. And then you can do all kinds of fun stuff with that meat and sell it to the consumer. And there's two types of consumers under this exemption. That's individual household consumers, and then what are called HRI consumers, and that is hotels, restaurants, and other similar institutions. So You can do a little bit of wholesaling under retail exempt, which is what you're doing when you're selling that meat to hotels, restaurants, and similar institutions. I'm going to talk a little bit about the limitations to sales to HRA. So if you do wholesale, you can't cure, cook, smoke, or render that product. You can only be selling like fresh cuts or ground products, but none of those value-added processes can you do under this retail exempt if you want to wholesale it. And it also can't exceed 25% of your total sales. There are some other limitations on how many pounds you can sell of different species to HRI customers. So I think retail exempt probably works best for folks who are selling direct to the consumer. Either that consumer's coming in your butcher shop and buying directly from you, or you're taking it to the farmer's market or other places where you can sell direct to the end user. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how that works for farmers markets. So you could have a retail exempt butcher shop. It doesn't have to be a full-time butcher shop. You could rent a commissary kitchen and just butcher 1 day a week. Or you could rent a restaurant that has a commercial kitchen 1 day a week on the day that they're closed and do your retail exempt butchery there. And then you can package that meat up. Doesn't have to have a USDA stamp on the final label. Just has to have the name of the cut and who produced it or who butchered it. And you can sell that product at farmers markets, just like you can at retail stores, butcher shops, etc. Because that's called a satellite location. The farmers market is. It again, labeling must be accurate and contain basic information, and you still need to keep the product cool. USDA inspector could, or a health inspector could always show up, just like they always could at a farmer's market, and make sure that your meat is stored properly. I believe it has to be under, it's been a while, I think 41 degrees is the max. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong there. But if you take it to farmers markets, just make sure that you keep it cool. And then I think I had one more slide about retail exempt. The other thing you can do with retail exempt that most people don't realize is that you can actually sell that meat via online e-commerce platforms. It can cross state lines as long as that product started out as USDA inspected meat. It can't cross state lines if it's ODA inspected meat. And you can also use third-party online marketplaces like food hubs and other aggregators to sell that meat for you. So that is how retail exempt works. So for those of you that want to do your own butchery and really kind of are fascinated by the artistry of cutting up meat and really want to control that side of the process by doing your own butchery, retail exempt is a great option for you. Now, what I need to make clear is this is not you taking your product to a retail exempt butcher counter and them doing it for you, and then you taking that product home and selling it. No, retail exempt is if you and your business is the butcher. You can hire a butcher, but it has to be your company who's doing the retail exempt butchery, not paying someone else who's a separate company, like a mom and pop locker, to do the butchery for you. Does that make sense? Any questions there? Okay. What would the example of a chain of custody record look like? That's probably for custom exempt. Oh, there's the 1,000 bird info. Okay, good. Which of these exemptions, if any, would be most applicable to farm stand on a ranch? Okay. So back to custom exempt chain of custody. I'm glad that somebody asked that question before I got too far along. So custom exempt chain of custody. So there's no rules about what that record keeping needs to look like, other than the carcass itself needs to be labeled with the owner's names at the processor. So maybe you provide the processor, this half is for this customer, this half is for this customer, and they've got their names and their phone numbers, right? But you, for your own business purposes, if you want to be able to prove that you pre-sold that live animal, it might be good to have some sort of record keeping system. So when I used to sell halves and wholes under custom exempt, I had a simple fillable form on our website where they would put a deposit down on a half an animal or a whole animal. And I would give the pig a name or a number, a letter or a number. So it was an identifiable animal that they owned. They put a deposit down, so they were now an owner of that animal. And then I would give them an estimated date for when it would go to the slaughterhouse. And the only other thing I asked is if they wanted a big one or a small one. That was the only customization I gave them, because I didn't know what they would weigh out at once they got to the processor and they were hanging, right? So just say big or small, give them an animal identification number, and then they would give me a deposit. And then I would send them a receipt for that deposit. And then on that receipt, I would say your balance due will be, the amount will be given to you after it's taken to the processor, and I know what the hanging weight is. And you have to pay me before you pick the meat up from the processor. And I had a good relationship with my processor. We brought them about 100 animals a year, so they liked us. And my processor would not release that animal until I told them it was paid for. And in 6 years of selling, 100 animals or so a year, that way, we only had one person not pay us for their half a pig. So we just got it ourselves, which was fine. We need to eat our own meat. So anyway, so that was how we did our record keeping. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. Oops, I'm going to look in the chat and see if there's any. Which of these exemptions, if any, would be the most applicable to a farm stand on our ranch? I assume this exemption wouldn't apply for situations where customers might come to our farm stand and want to purchase a smaller amount of meat, 5 to 10 pounds. Is that correct? Yeah, because if people are buying meat, then custom exempt does not apply. Or it already has that sticker of not for sale on it. So you have to use inspected meat if you're selling meat by the cut. If you want customers to buy bundles, they can pre-order that from a live animal. Maybe a 16th or an 8th would be like a mixed bundle, but they need to have pre-purchased that before the animal's been killed. But if that meat has already been killed and it's sitting in your cooler and they want to buy 5 to 10 pounds of meat, that's buying meat. That's not buying shares of a live animal. That should be inspected meat. Or you should be running a custom exempt, or excuse me, a retail exempt butcher shop yourself and then processing it yourself, and then you can sell it by the cut. Okay, hopefully I didn't confuse people too much. I know retail exempt is a little weird, but it's a way that I saw when I used to sell meat in California. I had a couple pig producer friends who were not happy with the quality of the USDA processing options we had in California. There was only like 5 in the whole state that would process pigs. Most of them would not scald pigs, and so they took the skin off. And some of my friends wanted to have skin on roasts and just have some fancier sausages and things that they couldn't get done at their USDA processor. So what they did is they had their animals killed at a USDA slaughterhouse. They then took the carcasses back to a commercial kitchen in Santa Cruz that they rented 2 days a week. They got their food handler's card. It was a licensed commercial kitchen, and they processed those USDA carcasses into sausages and fresh cuts. And then they sold them at the Santa Cruz Farmers Market the next day as fresh meat. They didn't even have to freeze it. And they killed it. They just did incredible that way. And they got to sell really beautiful pork. And I was always really jealous because I had my kind of ugly looking USDA meat there and not very nice vacuum sealed packages. And everything had the skin off, and my sausage varieties were really boring because my USDA processor had like 3 sausage varieties. And I remember being very jealous and also being like, wait, how do they get away with that? I want to know how to do that. And then I found out about retail exempt, and that they were actually doing the butchery of their own pigs. And I was like, oh, well, that's cool. All right. So before I pop into the next section where we talk about how to work with your processor, any other questions about the different inspections or exemptions? If you have 2 businesses, one is raising livestock and one is agritourism, can you buy the meat from yourself for your other business? Example, barbecue farm dinner event. Oh, somebody wrote, how is that Ryan at Pajaro Pastures? Yeah, that was him.
Small world.
Right. Yep. Let's see.
That's my question. So yeah, it's funny because I used to help Ryan with some of those dinners. So that's
nice.
kind of where this question comes from, but also because my husband's from Argentina and asado is a big deal.
Yes. So are you wondering if one of the business could be retail exempt?
Yeah, like if you have 2 LLCs, right, as 2 different things, you're an operator, but you also have like some sort of agritourism and events thing. If you're buying the animal as the agritourism from yourself, basically as a separate thing so that you can prepare it for other people,
yeah,
you could do it that way, right?
You could, yeah, it could be retail exempt
Okay.
meat, doesn't have to be done at an inspected processor. And then your agritourism business might have to get like a catering license or something like that from your, depending on your state. Yeah.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Appreciate it.
Totally. All right. So where are we at on time, Melissa? I can't see a clock.
It's 6:15.
Okay.
About.
Okay, great. So things you can do to work smarter, not harder with your processor. All right. So processors is more my wheelhouse now that I'm not a producer. I really try to understand how processor businesses work. And they are your friend and your partner. You can't survive without the processor's success, and they can't survive without the producers staying in business, right? So it's a partnership. And I would love it if more farmers thought of their processors as a partner. The more you can think that way, the better your relationship is going to be. So processors are under a lot of stress and scrutiny, much more so than producers, especially inspected processors, because they literally have someone breathing down their neck all day, every day, watching their every move, right? So it's really important that you know what they're experiencing and what their set of rules are so that you don't get them in trouble, and also just understand why they have to do the things that they do, even if it drives you crazy. So some of the things that a producer can, well, first I'll go through this side. The factors that affect a processor's success. They really need animals to be healthy. As soon as you get animals in there that are injured or can't walk, which is non-ambulatory, it becomes the processor's problem, and it could shut them down from their inspector's point of view. So the best thing is how a producer can collaborate is just don't bring those animals ever to an inspected processor. If you need them to be killed, that's when you either do it yourself or you call up a mobile custom slaughter truck to come do it on your property. But please do not ever bring those animals to an inspected processor because it could get them shut down. And it could spread disease and other issues. Another issue is improper producer documentation. Like if you've got older beef and you don't know how old they are, that's a real pain in the butt for your processor because they're going to have to take out the entire spinal cord, which means all of your loin cuts are going to have to be boneless because they have to pull the entire spinal cord out because they don't know how old it is. Anything over 30 months old has to have that all taken out because of bovine BSE, bovine spongiform encephal. I can't even say it. BSE. So have all that documentation ready, especially if you're going to bring them older animals. High levels of cut customization will drive them crazy and really raises their costs of production. Unclear requests is also problematic for them. No shows or reschedules, late or no show pickups, bringing a variety of carcass qualities in a single lot. So say you fill up your trailer with 20 pigs and, you know, a quarter of them are way under finished and a quarter of them are way over finished and hanging too heavy for their equipment. And so they're going to have to adjust things up and down in their knockbox, in and out, and the different gauge of firearms that they're using because some are older animals and some are younger animals. Stuff like that is a real pain in the butt for them. So if you can have your lots be similar, that's better. And if you need to bring the one, if you need to kill the one-off animal, that's where I suggest the mobile slaughter truck. Especially for those older animals because their skulls tend to be thicker. They don't generally kill on the first shot or don't generally die on the first shot. And if you bring that to an inspected processor, that could get them shut down. So it's much better to err on the side of caution and have your older animals killed under custom exempt without an inspector standing there and ideally on your farm. So that if it doesn't work out on the first shot, nobody's going to see it, right? Asking for really long hang times and aging times, various custom formulations for bacons and sausages and stuff like that. Having multiple customer pickups, you know, like if you're selling a bunch of animals in very small shares, like 16ths, and you've got 30 different customers coming to pick up their meat, that might drive your processor crazy and takes a lot of labor on their part. Of course, late payments. This can be a real shocker when you bring in your first load of animals. Maybe you've only brought in one or two at a time and you finally ramp up your production so you can bring in 20 pigs or 5 beef, and you get that first bill that's in the thousands of dollars and you're like, oh, I don't actually have that money in my account. Your processor is not a bank, so you need to have the cash flow to be able to actually pay them in full and on time. And then also just know that their costs of production, their labor costs, their utility costs, everything is going up a lot, just like for you. So try to be understanding if they have to raise their fees or their slaughter fees to account for all those increased costs. So yeah, just keep the sick animals at home, have your cut sheets ready to go. If you're new to this business and don't really know how to have your animals cut, why don't you, go ahead and ask the processor to have a meeting and they'll help you come up with like the best way to cut your animals so that you make money and they make money too. Prioritize punctuality. This one's kind of tricky, but understand the difference between CPG level product, and that is like the retail ready, case ready meat that's in a beautiful package versus your traditional cut and wrap product, whether that's paper wrapped or vacuum sealed, and the cost of processing between the two. If you want the really fancy retail ready product, you're going to have to pay a lot more for that product. And there's very few processors that have that kind of equipment. And don't expect your small kind of mom and pop meat lockers to be able to do the fancy retail ready packaging. Just understand it's a whole different beast. As much as you can, try to organize your customers so they all come on the same day, or make it as smooth as possible for the processor. And if you want them to have a special piece of equipment or software or a scalder or things like that, you can always consider buying it for them or co-investing in that, so that you can help them grow as you grow your business. And then just ask lots of questions. It's important for you to understand yields, and my next slide will give you some traditional yields that you should expect, but you need to know what yields are and the terminology. So live to hot yield is the live animal with all the blood and guts inside of it and the hides, and the hot yield is the animal right after it's been killed and eviscerated. And usually the hide's pulled off, but it's not yet hung in the cooler, right? So it's a hot carcass. They don't usually weigh them at that point, but I just want to let you know that there's a live yield and a hot yield. Then the next step is the hot to cold yield. And so that is the hot carcass versus a carcass that's been cooled in a cooler. And then there's that cooled carcass down to the final cut yield. And that's where you're going to get, actually the most variability you're going to see is the live to hot yield on beef anyway, because when they eviscerate it and take out the stomach and the innards, it loses several 100 pounds. But then that carcass down to the cut yield, how you tell them to cut your animal is going to determine what that final cut yield is. And if you give them less than stellar cutting instructions, you may be really disappointed with that final cut yield. Realize it's your responsibility, though it's not theirs, because you didn't give them good cutting instructions. All right, so here's some typical meat yields. Feel free to screenshot this if you want. This will help prevent you from accusing your processor of stealing meat, because that is not a thing. They really don't do that. There's only been a couple instances where the USDA has ever caught anyone of actually stealing meat. What generally happens is people don't understand the live weight of the animal that they brought in, and they don't realize the yield loss that happens from live to hot weight or carcass down to final cut weight. So if you brought in 1,000-pound live weight beef, the hot weight of that is going to be 620 pounds. So you just lost 380 pounds there, losing the carcass or losing the hide and the innards, right? Now, after it's been, I don't have the, I don't have the cold carcass weight here, but I have the final cut yield. So your hot weight after it's been cooled in the cooler, and then it's cut down to boneless cuts, but this includes the trim that goes into the grind, that may be 434 pounds. So your final yield as a percentage of your original live weight is only 43%. So you're getting 43% back of that initial animal, or 434 pounds. So when you bring a 1,000-pound animal in, you're going to get about 400 pounds of meat back. You can get that up a little bit if you leave the bone in and you ask for all the bones back and you ask for the offal back. A lot of that is your responsibility, though, to ask for those things back. Otherwise, they will they'll sell those or take them to the renderer, right? but you have to ask for them back if you want them back. Lamb, you start off with a 100-pound animal, you end up with about 35 pounds of meat. Goat is similar, even less. You get 33.75% of that live weight. Pig is the best in terms of yield, and you can get that up even better. 52%. You can get that up even more if you ask for the ears back and turn them into dog treats. You can get the gels and the cheeks back. You can get as many soup bones as you want. You can get all the back fat back and render that into lard or make soap. It's really up to you to ask for those things back. When we would bring pigs to our USDA inspected processor, we would get the heads back, and we we would sometimes sell the heads to like Weston Price people who did who knows what with those heads. I think they made like head cheese or something like that. We also sold them to some Mexican grocery stores. We would also feed them to our chickens. I know our chickens were little cannibals. We would take them home and cut off the ears and make dog treats for our livestock guard dogs, whatever. We just figured we might as well ask for everything back and then figure out what to do with it, right? So those are yields. Just wanted to show you this quick little example. This was from a Canadian processor, so everything's in kilograms. So don't really pay a whole lot of attention to that. But what I want to point out, if you can see my arrow, is this is I think these are I don't know. I think these are beef, but I'm not positive. Yeah, I think beef. So if your processor, if you give them not very good cutting instructions and they're trimming off like a lot of fat, and they're taking the bones out and you're getting everything boneless, say you're losing like 3% per head. Well, that shows you how much you lost per animal, or that's at a 350-pound animal. That's how many pounds you lost at a 700-pound animal, and on up to here. But I just wanted to show how much that means, like per day, per week, and per year in losses, depending on what percent yield loss you've got here. So the moral of the story is the more your processor can take their time to prevent yield loss, and the better your cutting instructions are, so that you're leaving the fat on things, you're leaving the bones on things. They're not having to spend a lot of time doing knife work trimming. And they're keeping more of your roasts and your chops and steaks intact with the bones, with the fat, all of that. The less yield loss you're going to suffer, and the more money you're going to make per animal. However, it is a fine line to ask your processor to do really nice cutting that way, to not trim as heavily as they're used to. So this is really where that partnership is important. If you become a good customer to a processor, so you're bringing them animals year round, you're consistent, you pay on time, and you want them to get the yield loss down per animal, you can ask if you can work on the cutting room floor with them and watch how they're cutting your animals and figure out a way to reduce that yield loss per animal, so that you can make more money per animal, and frankly, they can spend less time doing labor. So, but I just wanted to show you kind of on the back end what the processors are looking at. And in terms of hang times or aging time, 14 days is really the maximum on beef from a quality perspective. And pretty much all the meat science shows that anything past 14 days, you lose too much of the meat, and it doesn't pay for itself. So you're not going to be able to charge more money for that product if it ages longer than 14 days. You're going to get a lot more mold and yeast buildup on the outside of the carcass, which means they're going to have to trim it more heavily, which means more yield loss on your animal, which is money that you lose. Plus, the processors don't want their coolers full of your meat sitting there for days and days on end. If you want to age certain cuts, like the whole loin, you might be able to work with your processor to just age certain cuts, not the whole carcass. Or if you're a retail exempt butcher, you can age loins as long as you want. I've been in some really nice retail exempt butcher shops where they're custom aging loins for restaurants, and I've seen ribeyes and New Yorks and other loins in there that are like 64 days old, and they look beautiful. Sheep and hogs don't need to hang much more than a few days. And I think this is pretty much my last question, or my last slide before I'll open it up for more questions. So this is when you are courting a new processor to become a partner of yours in your business, it's important to request an introduction meeting with the plant manager or owner. Maybe you do that in person, maybe you just do it over the phone, and tell them, what you're looking for. Ask them lots of open-ended questions. What months do they need more volume? A lot of processors are busy in the fall, but they don't have enough animals the rest of the year. So ask them when they would like you to bring animals, what days of the week, do they process different species on different days, what time they like their animals dropped off. Do you drop them off the night before or early in the morning? What documentation do they need to bring? And then how do you like the animals dropped off? How do you prefer to be communicated with? Who's your point of contact? What are their payment terms, if any? Some might give you net 21 or net 30. What's your pickup policy for picking up the finished meat on times and days? Can someone train me on your drop-off procedure? So it's important that you know how they like animals dropped off, and how you need to back your trailer up to their lairage, which is the outdoor pens. What they do for hang times. Do they have a live scale? If not, how do they track carcass weights, and could they get that information to you? What customization is available, such as smoking and curing and things of that nature. And then can you help me with my label design and approval? On that last question, if you are planning on selling inspected meat, either USDA or ODA, your processor has to help you with a label, because the label actually has to have their inspection number on it. So the labels actually have to be stored at their facility. They own the labels. So you maybe bought the labels, but they have to physically store your labels because their inspection number is on the label. They can't let you take that home, because then you could do things with that label. And they're in charge of their own inspection stamp. All right. That's our website right there, nichemeatprocessing.org. And that's my email. And I'm going to take my sharing off and answer questions. Thanks for bearing with me. Recording. Is there a recording available? Yes. Right? Where do you post the recordings?
Yes, we will email everyone that's registered for this webinar the recording link and all the resources that we've linked in the chat, as well as anything else we can think of that might be helpful, including the NPAN website, that sort of thing. And we'll usually send that out by the end of the week. So you should just check your inbox and it will be coming to you.
Awesome. Tyler has a question, and he wonders if restaurants can purchase shares of animals through custom exempt processing. No, that is not possible. Restaurants have to buy inspected meat. That's the law in Oregon and every other state as well. So only inspected product, either USDA or ODA inspected product.
May I?
Oh, go
Sorry
ahead.
about that. So the previous question that someone had asked about having two businesses and then one of them essentially buying their own meat for a barbecue. So that scenario would have to be USDA or ODA inspected meat.
Or retail exempt. So
Okay.
yeah. So I think she was referring to retail exempt butchery. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, custom exempt will all be labeled not for sale, and none of that can be wholesaled. Do we need to have our animal inspected in order to sell dog treats and bones? Could we sell the bones left over from a custom exempt processor? That is a great question. It is a little bit gray area. Every state has a state veterinarian that may have different rules. As long as it's labeled pet treats and not pet food, you can usually sell bones and ears and fat that have been processed under custom exempt processing. Don't ever call anything ever pet food or dog food or cat food. Just don't use the word food, because that product needs to not only be processed in a USDA facility, but you have to get your label and your nutritional information approved by a state veterinarian, as it needs to be nutritionally complete food for that species that you're feeding it to. So just call it a treat, and that's how you skirt around those rules. You can also, I should say, the fat that you get back from a custom exempt butcher, you can make that into soap or candles or any non-food product. Go for it. You can do whatever you want if it's a non-food product, and you could go ahead and sell those non-food products: moisturizing lotion, facial cream, hair oil, whatever you want, right? Knock yourself out. Will the Thomas Massey bill allow selling without USDA? I don't think that is ever going to go anywhere. The Prime Act. However, if it does pass, custom exempt processors are still required to follow all federal regulations with regard to sanitation, building requirements, humane slaughter, etc. So there still is USDA oversight. But I don't think it has a lot of interest from a lot of other congressional people at this time. That could change. Let's see. If selling shares via custom exempt, can you sell those shares outside Oregon, for instance, to customers in Washington? Yeah, that's fine. There's no rules around where those people are from. I was told in Oregon that there's no difference between pet food and treats. No, there definitely is. Just like I said, don't call anything food, because unless you can prove it's nutritionally adequate for the species that it's labeled for, so say it's dog food or cat food, you have to submit to a lab and get it all tested and have it approved by the state veterinarian. And unless you're planning on like really launching a business in that world, I don't recommend going through that process. Can you make jerky and sell it at farmers markets or farm direct from a custom exempt butchered beef? No, you cannot sell custom exempt meat ever. Hopefully I made that clear. But custom exempt is not for sale meat. Your owners of that animal can have part of that animal made into jerky for themselves. But custom exempt meat is never to be sold at farmers markets. Retail exempt is a different story. That's where you're doing your own butchery in a licensed commercial kitchen. you can go ahead and make jerky and sell that at farmers markets. Cyrus, just so we fully understand, to sell meat cuts on our farm ourselves, the only route would be to have our meat slaughtered and processed by an inspected processor. Is that correct? The other option for smaller meat amounts being selling by the bundle under custom exempt. Yes, or doing your own retail exempt butchery and a retail or in a licensed commercial kitchen. How are new Oregon farm regulations going to affect small livestock producers? I don't know about any new meat regulations. They did add red meat inspection a few years ago. Is there something else that's coming down the pipeline, like new CAFO rules or anything like that, Melissa? Or Haley?
I haven't heard anything about meat. If there is some rules about Oregon Farm Direct, but that's not meat related. So if you have like fruits, vegetables, and processing those and selling them, there's a whole set of rules on that, but not meat. Unless there's something new in the legislature that I haven't heard of.
I do know that they were reworking the rules around rabbits, and I don't know if that has been finalized yet.
That's a good one. I keep checking in with ODA. They have to write the rules once the legislation is passed, and it did pass, but I still haven't gotten a copy of what that means to our local rabbit producers. As soon as I do, we're going to share it out. So if you're not connected with the OSU Small Farms Program, get connected with us and we'll just keep you up to date on that kind of thing. But it should be out anytime, is what I've been told, on the rabbits.
Allison asks, once we have inspected meat packaged, can we store the frozen meat at our farm? Is there any sort of license needed? You can store the meat at your farm, and I'm pretty sure there is a license.
Yep. It's called the Meat Seller's License. It's available through the Oregon Department of Agriculture. Essentially, what they're looking at are your freezers, making sure you have good quality freezers that are going to keep the meat frozen. They also look at the room that the freezers are in to make sure that there's not a bunch of gunk and other weird things that are stored in the same room with the freezers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to sell meat in California, but we had something similar. They came out and looked at we had giant freezers in an outbuilding. They just wanted to make sure the freezers were working and that there wasn't like signs of rodent activity. And then also not commingling product. So if you do have not for sale meat at your property, don't have it in those freezers with inspected product. Keep them separate, maybe in your home freezer, but don't have them out there. Let's see. With pet treats, could you sell in CSI or farmers market if it was harvested under custom exempt? Oh, CSA. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Those are allowed just as long as it's called pet treat. Are there any new USDA processing facilities in Southern Oregon? Yeah, Montgomery Meats just got their USDA grant of inspection for a modular slaughter unit in Central Point. And then they also have a processing facility down there on a separate location, but they can do it all for you now. And then Crystal Creek, which is in Roseburg, they got an ODA grant to expand. So they're in the process of expanding their capacity to do more. And then my coworker David Zarling is running the former Belcampo plant right across the border in Wairika, and they are looking for more customers. So if that's a possibility for you, pop on down. It's called Star Harvest. But yeah, Montgomery Meats is doing does a really nice job on the processing side, at least. I don't know about their new slaughter facility. All right, I still have 15 more minutes, so feel free to ask some more questions. And you can unmute yourself too. You don't need to just pop it in the chat. Any plans for the workforce development program to expand to other areas of the state? Yeah, so we're doing a hybrid butchery training program at Blue Mountain Community College in Pendleton. We do have folks from all over the state taking it. Some of the content is online using Range Meat Academy's online course, and then we're going to meet in person for 4 different weekends in Pendleton. That program's already started yesterday, so we're not taking more applicants. We had a ton of applicants, so we can only take 15 students per time because the meat lab at Blue Mountain is pretty tiny. But this is a pilot program, and if it goes well, we would like to bring it to other community colleges. I think Rogue Community College expressed an interest, and then we might be able to bring it to OSU campus and use the meat lab there. So if it goes well, and we think it will, we can bring it to other places. So I'm stoked about that. Yeah, it's a good problem.
Sorry.
Go
I had a
ahead.
quick question. So
Yeah.
we do our beef, some of them USDA inspected, and I was curious, not everywhere makes like pepperoni and teriyaki and stuff. How do we go about maybe getting that done with our USDA meat?
Yeah, I totally understand that problem. A lot of USDA inspectors are reticent about adding a bunch of new product formulations, mainly because they have to get a separate HACCP plan developed and approved for different products if they varied considerably, So they tend to offer a pretty limited menu of products like sausages and snack sticks and jerkies and stuff like that. So a couple ways you could work around it. One is if you're a good customer to a processor, meaning you're bringing them a lot of business, you could sit down with them and say, hey, I would like to develop a new product with you. Not 10 new products, but maybe start with one. What would it take to get this formulation approved by USDA? And how can I help you work through that process? So that's one tact you can take. Another is you can take cuts from a USDA processor that are frozen in boxes and have the USDA stamps on them. You can take them to another USDA processor who just specializes in value-added processing. So for example, like I live in the Dalles, and Pendleton, Oregon is Hill Meat Company. All they do is bacon. They make amazing bacon. They will custom process bacon for larger hog producers. I could take all my frozen bellies that are in boxes from one USDA processor, bring them to Hill, and ask them to make bacon for me because they do a really nice, like uncured, nitrate-free bacon, right? So that's always an option, is to just take some of your product to somebody else. Would either of those options work for you?
Yeah, I think so. So say you do the first USDA butcher, could you just tell him that you wanted to take X amount of meat to another USDA facility that does that, and he would probably set aside the cuts for that necessary, and they wouldn't need to be vacuum sealed either with our labels and all that other jazz, but
yeah, just say you want primals of a certain cut. Just say,
okay.
hey, can you save all the bellies for me? Can you save all the chuck roasts for me?
Okay.
In primal form. They'll still put them in a big plastic bag,
Right. Yeah.
inside a box, and it
Yeah,
still has to have their label on it on the outside, right?
Uh-huh.
And it's your responsibility to make sure it stays under the temperatures while you're transporting it to the other USDA processor.
Right. That was my next question, because we're looking at maybe going to the farmers markets this year with that USDA meat, and I don't remember seeing anything with obviously you want to keep it chilled, but like the specific like temperature to keep them under. like
Well,
you
if
talked about?
yeah, if it's frozen, it needs to be under 32, I believe. And if it's fresh, I think it has to be under 41 degrees.
Okay.
Um, I can try to look that up and Melissa can send it out in the email. I think it's in the book that I wrote. I have the exact numbers. But so you can do that if you bring frozen meat to the farmer's market. It can be as simple as coolers with ice.
Mhm.
That'll keep it frozen. I used to use frozen water bottles, so I'd buy water bottles by the case at Costco. I'd freeze them. I learned to use that instead of ice because it was way cheaper because I could reuse them.
Oh, yeah.
And ice is very expensive. So frozen water bottle trick worked fabulous because I also, if you ever have the customers like, oh, I'm not gonna be home for 4 hours. I don't know if I want to buy
Yeah.
this. Be like, here, take a water bottle.
There you go. That's a good idea.
So yeah. So that worked really well. And we had, I think in the 6 years we were selling at farmers markets, we had like 2 surprise inspections by a USDA inspector who wanted to look at our meat and he temperature checked it. And it was under 32 degrees. So
Perfect. My last question, I promise it's my last one, is I missed the part where you were saying like the non-consuming products for like the tallow lotions and whatnot. You
yeah,
can make that from the custom exempt
yeah.
slaughter stuff, and you don't need a commercial kitchen to make that stuff and to sell it, correct?
No, no, not for non-food products. You don't need a commercial kitchen.
That's all I needed.
Yeah. Body care products, candles, all that good stuff. You can do it at home. Yeah. So that's kind of fun. If you raise pigs, you're going to have a ton of back fat. So that might be a good way to get rid of a bunch of that. Any more questions? I sell chicken. I'm told I can't sell at farmers markets because it's only processed on the farm. If I do sell at an ODA facility, they tell me I can sell anywhere in Oregon. Yeah, so you're probably under the 1,000 bird exemption.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that you can only sell on the farm. Yeah. If you want to sell at farmers markets, you either need to start your own ODA licensed facility. You can do that in an outbuilding or in a commercial kitchen and get one of those 1 to 20,000 bird licenses, or you can bring it to an ODA licensed poultry processor. There's a handful of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to confirm that's what I was planning on doing this year.
Yeah. Do you know which processor you might work with?
I've scheduled with Helvetia.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Thank you.
Glad there's a few left. Do turkeys and ducks fall under the poultry exemption laws we've been discussing? Yes, they do. And there's a few other randoms, like, I don't know, pigeons or something like that. I can't remember all of them. Quail, maybe quail. Can't remember. Yeah, there's like 5 species. I think even ostrich. Yeah, I think ostrich. In case anyone wants to do ostrich. Oh, I will say quickly, if you want to raise a non-amenable species, so these are basically like wild game type species, yak, bison, llama, alpaca, farm deer, farmed elk. I think those are the main ones. ODA's new red meat inspection program also covers those non-amenable species, which is cool. So you can actually get those animals killed under inspection, which will allow you to be able to wholesale that meat to restaurants and grocery stores and stuff like that. Before that was not an option. However, that said, the only place I know in Oregon, well, no, actually there's 2. I only know 2 places that are doing those species as of this moment, but maybe some of you can educate me if I'm wrong. But Mohawk Valley Meats in Springfield. We'll do bison and maybe a couple of those other game species. And then Malco's Buxton Meats in Sandy will also do them under inspection. So that gives you more options for where you can sell that meat. Any other final questions?
I just looked up on the ODA website real quick about the species that fall under the 1,000 bird exemption. And it looks like it's chickens. Oops, lost it. Here we go. Chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, or guinea fowl. That's all that's listed. So it's saying no wild game birds, which I think that quail would probably be considered that, although I know that you can buy domesticated quail. And it says no pet birds in case anybody's wanting to know that. And no endangered species. So, okay.
What if your chicken has a name though?